Yeah, thank you, Pat. Okay, for those of you that don't know me, Kathy Swasina, and my background, Army, 32 years altogether, and retired as a colonel, and I was in IT strategic planning for the military and did a lot of like data center consolidation, the first one, and setting up networks and whatnot. So strategy is very near and dear to my heart. And these critical infrastructure exercises that we are kicking off at different AFCEA chapters around the United States are very critical, I think, in breaking down the silos between federal, state, and local, and get some crosstalk going for the critical infrastructure of this country, and how can we shore it up, how can we improve it, and where those improvements need to be made. Clint?
I want to point out that the audience is all sitting like we're going to bite. I mean, you guys are all way back there.
We believe in consent. We will not bite without consent.
So my name is Clint Walker. I am the current acting chief of the Cybersecurity Advisor Program for the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. So I cover the 8 states down here in the Southeast: North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, and Tennessee. I have a team of right now 16, but I have 22 slots that actually cover this area as cybersecurity advisors. And one of the things that we do is we do tabletop exercises. So there's no charge, no cost to you, taxpayer funded, for us to come in and do an exercise with your organization or with your ecosystem. We prefer to do ecosystems where we can, because we want to exercise you and your supply chain. We want you to exercise with your emergency services, with your power company. We want you to look at things from as broad of a picture as possible, because it's no longer a matter of can you protect your own kingdom by yourself, because there's no way that you can. You are in this with partners, and if you're not exercising with your partners, because we see so many incidents fail where the response fails because they're relying on somebody else to do something, and that somebody else isn't prioritizing it the same way that the company who's being attacked is. So.
Hi, I'm Marina Alvarez. I recently retired about a year ago from the State Department. I have 30 years of federal service, 10 in the Marine Corps in the air traffic control side of the world, 13 at DOJ as a Class B IP network owner. So I own the whole Class B. And at State Department, I retired as the acting program manager for Identity, Credential, and Access Management System for the entire State Department. So I owned systems, and let's be clear that what we're talking about here is an expansion of what, as any federal system owners or managers do, is incident response. The incident response now is not only is your system, my ICAM system, down, but is the whole data center down? Is the whole town's watershed down? Is the whole town's communication portal down? We're talking the scope. So those of you who have been federal or DoD system owners know what an ISP is and how do you respond. We have to expand it just the way we're being targeted by other actors at our city, town, county levels.
How many of you here use cloud computing as part of your environment? How many of you have ever had to do an incident response with your cloud provider? Anybody? How many of you would think your cloud provider would allow you to do forensics analysis on their systems in the middle of an incident response? If it's not outlined in your contract on what you can do and what you can't do during a time of crisis, you might find that the very partners you rely on for your infrastructure aren't willing to work with you because it's a priority for you. You're going through a major attack. It's not a priority for them. They've got 700 other customers that they're working with, and they've got business as usual things to do. They might not prioritize or put resources toward you when you want them just because you're going through something. And if they have any inkling that they might have been the cause of your breach or your problem, they're not going to want to help you at all until they have legal representation, look through things, or find out what their liability is. I can tell you that I've personally been involved with a lot of incident response, especially with cloud providers involved, and the cloud providers have always hindered the process rather than help the process until they get enough evidence that they're not liable for anything, and then suddenly they jump in and want to help as much as possible. But in the initial response times, they've slowed things down. Now you multiply that out by every vendor, every supplier, every infrastructure, every utility that you have, and them all wanting to cover the CYA, so to speak, you're looking at a very messy incident response when you don't have access to all those log files or to all those personnel records, all the things that you would like to try and figure out. It really can bog things down.
So one of the things that we're doing with AFCEA with the critical infrastructure exercises that we're calling Vanguard Shield, we are looking at possible scenarios of a physical attack with cyber attack on top of it. And that's kind of making us a little unique in some of the exercises that we're performing, because that is the real world now. That is how the enemy is operating, and that's what we are seeing. So how do we talk and get the cross coordination and the handshake when you need to pass something from one organization to another?
There's a lot of people here who are DoD Army. Is the first time you give someone a weapon to defend their position or their team the day of an attack? Or do you train them? Do you take them to the range? Do you get it so it becomes muscle memory? Do you become instinctive? Like if I were to yell, "Attention on deck," everybody would stand up because it's muscle memory. It's been programmed into you. And that's what's lacking right now, because one example Clinton did with one tabletop exercise is you're a small town, say 70,000, and you have a white truck, cargo truck, van truck, whatever, take out the power pole at your watershed. What do? Instinct is to say, okay, so, big deal, it doesn't affect us. How do you know? Was it a DUI? Was it a medical emergency? Is it a distraction by a nation-state actor because you have a big game or concert, something coming up? You don't know. The point is, and forgive me for this analogy, I've yet to come up with a better one, so if you all can come up with one, I'd appreciate it. You have to treat everything like a murder scene until you prove it's otherwise. Otherwise, if you're a company and you have ransom cyber insurance, they're not gonna pay. Everything has to be treated like a critical incident until you've proven otherwise.
And the other thing is there's no plan survives contact with the enemy. I think that's what the old saying is. For those of you who've ever been through an incident, whether it be a cyber or a physical incident, things go right out the window because the people that you might rely on are on vacation, or they've maybe taken another job, or people have shifted positions and the plan didn't keep up with all these things happening. When you exercise a plan, and unfortunately a lot of people plan against known entities, meaning that they're planning against something that's already happened to somebody else, which means you're planning for something that's known, but it's all the unknown things that, so if you can do a tabletop exercise where you're planning against something maybe that's never happened before, or people might roll their eyes and be like, oh, this isn't likely to ever happen. Well, those are the times where you're actually looking at the plan as a whole to say, hey, yeah, maybe this isn't likely to happen, but it's going to allow us to exercise in a way that we're stretching our ability to see what our capabilities really are. And like's been said, you don't want to send a football team out to play a game if they've never practiced together. And if you've never practiced with your partners, with your vendors, with your suppliers, then you might all be running the wrong formation or running the wrong, play when you need something else being run.
A bridge will never collapse. Never, ever, said anybody till it happened in Baltimore.
Right. It was almost like somebody was listening into our planning sessions. We have a number of scenarios that we like to run and move out from there. And oh, by the way, we do want this panel to be interactive. So if you have questions or ideas, we're open to, raise your hand. Go ahead, interact.
How many of you guys are responsible for your social media at your town, city, or command? Okay, example. Running the account. But guess what? In a small town or a medium-sized city, it's IT. If bad info is being spread by social media to this generation that says, don't show up to work, they're going to believe it. Even if the person, State Department, civil servant, but we had issues where people at posts and consulate overseas would rotate out, and now Facebook, Instagram, and all that stuff, no one had the password because the person left, and all of a sudden it's an IT system, figure it out. No one thought of privileged access management because this is your publicity. This is how you communicate with the public. You're going to let some intern or some, I don't know the Army ranks, but some Lance Corporal run the social media site, and if they call in sick or maybe went UA, all of a sudden you lose control of that and it's been hijacked? Do you really need that kind of PR? It instantly becomes an IT problem when it never was an IT system, and you got to figure it out. And these are the types of things that a lot of people don't think about.
How many of you have ever looked to see how many systems your organization actually uses and how many of them IT actually has control over? I've been involved in a lot of incidents where suddenly the IT department's being pulled in to handle a cyber incident, and they're like, wait a minute, what system is this? And they're like, well, the accounting needed a new accounts receivable system, and so they went out and found a cloud service that does software as a service, so they just contracted with that, but now we're having an issue where we think somebody's stolen all the data from it. And IT, we need you to figure out or enact your incident response plan to figure out how it was stolen. Or you're like, we've never seen this system before. We're not involved in any of the architecture. Why are we suddenly responsible for incident response? And they're like, well, because our incident response plan says that IT is responsible for all systems in this organization. So the rogue IT or the shadow IT, whatever you want to call it, the IT group is being told that they're responsible for systems they never even knew existed because of the ability of an organization to go out and procure systems or services without going through the IT for those things.
That mysterious child you never knew you had just showed up, and now they're going after you for child support.
Yeah, that's so true. As a former CIO, that was just it. The functionals are the owners of the system, but yet the CIO and the IT is held responsible.
You guys want to talk about the exercise at Atlanta watershed and how you guys utilize
The ripple effect.
Let's start with that.
Are you going to make me remember something I've done in the past?
I know, sorry.
I do so many exercises. I'm probably going to struggle to remember exactly what we did specifically for that. But most of my exercises, so I like to say, when you look at exercise, I see a lot of organizations run tabletop exercise, and I like to call it the movie plot thread.
Right.
And so most organizations say, hey, I'm going to introduce a threat actor, and then I'm going to introduce some bad things. And so like if you're ever watching an episode of Law and Order, they show you the guest star of Law and Order, and then they say, hey, there's these murders that are happening. And you can usually say, oh, I bet the guest star is the one causing those murder because otherwise they wouldn't have had the guest star. Well, that's what these tabletop exercises are like, is that you've introduced a bad guy, you have some threat indicators, so you can automatically attribute the indicators to that bad guy. I take a little different approach, and what I do is I introduce anywhere between 6 to 12 different threat actors. I'm going to introduce lots of different threat indicators, and I'm never going to tell you which one is attributed to what. I want to see your process of how would you identify this. Because that's really what incident response is do you even really know in your organization what the difference between an event and an incident is? When would you know that something is going wrong? When do you declare? So if I say that, hey, the Russians are interested in your particular sector, the Chinese have actively known to be exploiting this particular vulnerability, you have a Bob in accounting has been passed over a promotion this week and has sworn that he's going to get back at whoever's responsible for that. And then I start to say you have a blue dot on one of your servers. Is that a malfunction on the server? Is that something, was that a patch or an update from this week? Or is it the Russians? Is it the Chinese? Or is it Bob? Suddenly you don't know. It's not easy to try and pull these things. And that's what real incident response looks like. It's not easy to pull that thread. And what happens now, let's take this even one step further. So let's complicate things even more when I look at an exercise, because and I pull things from real world events that I've done. So now we start to investigate the blue light on this server to figure out what's going on. And we find out, oh, look, Sally over in accounting has been embezzling money. Well, we're investigating the blue light and we found evidence of a crime. Do we stop investigating the blue light in order to look for the crime? Now we want to start prosecuting somebody. So now we need to have chain of custody. We want to start looking at suddenly your incident response takes a completely different avenue. Does it completely derail? Now maybe you have a system get hit with ransomware. Okay, we forgot, we stopped looking for the blue light. Is the ransomware attributed to the blue light? What do we do about the embezzlement that's happening over here? All of these things are really going on. The number of times that we've gone in to help with incident response and we've come across a crime, whether it be child pornography, whether it was embezzlement, whether it was harassment, whether it was insider trading, it's huge the number of times that happens. You never ever just find one thing. There's always this cascading effect. Does that change incident response for you? If you have to change from being just straight responding, would you let a pedophile go free in order to get back up and operational? Would you stop trying to get back up and operational in order to gather the evidence needed to put the pedophile behind bars? These are questions you don't want to be asking in the middle of an incident. These are things you want to exercise ahead of time. Where do you draw the line? Is it health and safety? Is it financial? Is it reputation? Where do you start to look at your risk thresholds versus the incident that's going on? How do you, get the decision makers around this? Especially if you add in even more complexity and say there's a physical event at the same time of the cyber event, maybe they're correlated, maybe they're not. How do you have two incident commanders, one who's looking over your physical incident, one who's looking over your cyber incident? How are they communicating? How are they drawing resources on each other? What if the people from physical want the IT people to suddenly stop what they're doing so they can pull the access logs for a certain room so they can see who went in there? And he's like, well, I'm busy over here trying to restore a server because we were hit with ransomware. Which one do you want me to do? There's only one of me. What is my priority for what we're doing? What is the most important thing to the organization?
The whole thread was pulled and the suit is falling apart. Real life scenario, in State Department, we used Okta for our identity provider for cloud, our source of truth. Get a phone call from my operations guy. We're having issues. Okay, no problem. Let's get the team together and start looking at this. Then we start getting calls from further up the food chain. We're having issues where two people sitting together in the same office, one can access Okta, the other one is blocked. Then we've got the same thing going on overseas. And we're trying to figure it out. You know what? The one thing we never did is we never called Okta, because it was, why is some traffic going through and some traffic not? 4 hours later, after it had been escalated to essentially the CIO's secretary, we were still trying to keep it from the CIO. We didn't want Dr. Fletcher knowing quite yet. We decided, look, we just got to get Okta's help. Lo and behold, an example of Clint said, well, the State Department had a range of IP addresses that entered our cloud cell, to let everybody know that they were trying to access State Department resources. At the same time, somewhere along the way, another customer was having a DDoS attack. So Okta, since it's based on AWS technology, blocked a set of IP ranges. They went out and highlighted a bunch of them to keep the DDoS attack under control for that client. 10 guesses, first 9 don't count. Which State Department IP range was accidentally swept up into their isolation? It was not our issue. And if we had called Okta from the beginning and not wasted 4 hours and having everybody panic and trying to do basic 101 troubleshooting, we could have resolved this probably in about an hour and a half, because someone in Okta trying to be proactive and secured was not as detail oriented as they should be, and accidentally swooped up one of our IP address that belonged to State Department entry door. And that's why, I don't remember how many IPs we had. Let's say the 4 other IPs we had work. So if your query was accessing one of those 4 IP ranges and not the one over here, you got through. A ghost in the machine.
You have a question there, sir?
Yeah, if there's an incident.
Oh, we don't take questions from you.
Wait a sec, where do we send the bill?
Well, if there's an incident and your traditional forms of communication, say the email or cell phone is compromised or down, do you have any out-of-band communication preferences or go-tos?
Whatever works.
Whatever you have planned for in your plan, you should have out-of-band communications fully defined as part of your incident response plan, business continuity plan.
Sure, what are your favorites?
Yeah,
Well, since they don't exist anymore, I'd say a POTS line, but
it really depends on what your mission is and what your capabilities are. I mean, if you're a small or medium-sized business, resorting to personal cell phones might be your best bet. If you're a large company, having, satellite-issued phones or something like that, depending on what type of disaster you're looking at, or having, a signal app that you can communicate out of band, something along those, like a secure communication line.
During an act of God, if that cell phone tower was down, we did a tabletop in Central Florida, a bunch of CISSPs who should have known what to do. When we got to that, out-of-band communication question, do we meet at a predefined place? There really weren't a lot of answers for that, so.
That's where you have to look at your risk, your likelihood of something to occur. What are all the avenues? What are the threats to your communication? And then what is your risk tolerance for that? So satellite. I know a lot of the critical infrastructure I work with, they do have sat phones for their people that are sitting there just in case comm lines go down. They have people that they keep on staff that are trained, ham radio operators, and they have a ham radio station set up at certain sites, so they can always move to that if they need to communicate. So it depends on what your capabilities are, what your mission is, and how much money you're willing to put into something. But out-of-band communications, up to and including, the destruction of cell phone towers or landline towers should be part of your plan. You should look at the risk saying, does this need to be part of our incident response plan? For most companies, the answer is no, but for some companies, the answer should be yes. We need to be able to communicate on those sites.
Well, you live in the South during tornado or hurricane season. This is a very
Real thing.
word of advice, having come from telecom, never ever call, because now we're all on cell phones, never ever call your family and let them know you're okay. You know why? You and 5 million other people are doing the same thing. Send a text message. A text message is lower bandwidth, is highly likely to get through on a limited bandwidth tower than it is an intensive data hog of a voice line. No lie. Sorry, Clint, I got another story. I was working
Tell
for
all the
DOJ, and they were looking at their data center consolidations. No lie. I was on leave in Disney World when at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call. The entire DOJ data center in Rockville, Maryland went down. And since I was one of the people who owned the operational of my system, they called me. And I go, who else can I call? And they're like, we don't know. They were so narrow in scope, they didn't even have the recall roster, as the Marine Corps back in the day used to call it, of hard copy. This is how you get a hold of the company gunny. This is how you get the sergeant major. This is how you get a hold of all this. No one printed out a hard copy of system owners and POCs that they could landline call. We're talking, go back, okay, I know some of you were born after the 80s. Go back to your grandmother's era and once a quarter, print out and have it. Everybody, all the soldiers here probably have each other's phone numbers in case they need to get a hold of. What happens if your phone dies and you gotta go to somebody else's phone? You don't have it memorized. A frickin' hard copy of at least your next 2 layers of chain of command is going to cover your butt. Analog, paper, redundant backups.
I think both these two examples, what you're giving, are why we want to do the exercises. That's exactly why we want to do the exercises. Go ahead.
Exactly. That's why I was going to say, this is exactly why we want to exercise the systems and the SOPs. Go ahead, Doug.
I was just going to say, you want to get out of your comfort. You want to look at things from as, newbie as possible. You want to say, if I knew nothing about this, could I pick up our incident response plan and could I enact this? I've been involved in so many incidents over the years, and there's so many stories I could tell around these, but just, like one of the ones, like imagine a site that has a fire and the fire department shows up and the fire department starts putting out the fire, right? And that sounds like a great thing to happen. And it really is, until somebody walks up to the fire department and says, okay, we got everybody out of the building, right? And they're like, what do you mean? It's 2:00 in the morning. There shouldn't have been anybody in the building. They're like, no, we're 24/7 operations. We have a small enclave that sits in the very center of that building. Did anybody get them out? And suddenly they realized they'd been fighting the wrong thing. They'd been doing the wrong thing. They should have looked for, health and safety first, getting people out. Were those people accountable? No, those people were trapped in that building still with the fire. They'd been fighting the fire for an hour now, and those people were still trapped inside there. But the fire department didn't know that there were people in the building. Nobody ever operated or told them that we'd switched from a 9 to 5 building to a 24/7 operation. And they also didn't know that they now had a data center and they couldn't use certain types of water or certain type of chemicals when it came to a data center fire. So they were using the wrong chemicals to try and fight the fire in the first place. So those are the kind of things that, you need to look at, say, let's start from scratch and say, let's run through every single incident. Let's run through fire. Let's run through flood. Let's run through, hail or lightning. Let's run through a cyber attack. And I hate to say cyber attack is one thing, because even there, let's talk about, denial of service attack versus a ransomware attack versus, corporate espionage versus, extortionware, whatever. There's so many different types of cyber attack. And just to say we have one cyber attack and incident response, well, there's 17 different types of escalation or different types of ways that you could take a cyber attack that would all change the way that you would respond to it. So have you really thought through those things?
Let me throw a monkey wrench at you. Those of you who are stationed or go overseas, in an embassy, you've got people who are foreign nationals who work in the embassy. They have no need, no reason to be on the computer network. Oh, but 6 months ago, we rolled out where they can only get their pay stubs through the computer over there. And they've always been a gardener, a driver, a cook. They know nothing about cybersecurity. It's not in their culture to do computers or things like that. And now you have a language barrier and a cultural barrier, yet you're allowing them to access predetermined terminals to go get their pay stubs and see if their timesheets are correct. Could that pose a risk to your network and to your systems?
Yeah, for those of you who heard my earlier talk where I said you have to think like the threat actor, that's really what you want to do when you're putting these scenarios together. You want to think in so many places like, oh, we want to walk through a scenario that we think we're comfortable. No, you want to get out of your comfort zone. You want to do a worst case scenario, and you actively want to invite everybody in the room to make the scenario worse than it already is. You want to see the very worst day that you can have, or the worst month, or whatever it is that you're doing. I did a tabletop exercise with the Atlanta Hawks recently where we walked them through. So I started at the beginning of summer and walked them all the way through into summer. So every event that they had, and I made something bad happening at every event, whether it was hacktivism or activists happening outside, whether it was one person putting a thumb drive into a computer that then 3 months later something bad happened on the network. It built upon, because sometimes there's all these events happening. You might not even be able to trace where patient zero came from. In a steady state operation, that might be easy, but during a time of crisis. And then you want to keep escalating things. And I'll tell this quick story. So imagine you have a server. So everybody's familiar with the confidentiality, availability, integrity, CIA, right? Which one of those is the most important? Yeah. So imagine you have a server, and this is something that really happened to me. Back when I was with the DoD, I had a server, and this server was availability high. This server had something on it that I could never let this server go down. This server had to have not, 5 nines uptime. I had so much redundancy built into this system that it was unreal. The other thing is this server had high confidentiality. I could never let anybody who wasn't read into this program see even one bit of information on this program. This server had imminent failure on all the redundancies. Everything went bad at the same time with this particular vulnerability. This had to be handled right away, because otherwise we were going to lose the server. Availability was going to go away. The only person who could fix that one thing that we could find that could get there in time was not cleared to be in that program. There was nobody around that was willing to read this person into that program. So what do? Which one takes precedence? Do I keep the server up and available by allowing an uncleared person to work on that server? Or do I let the server fail in order to maintain the confidentiality of what was on those servers? When you only have 10 minutes to make a decision, is that the decision you want to be trying to make during those 10 minutes? Is which one of those is more important than the other? Is confidentiality or availability more important in that situation? That is not the time you want to be having that conversation. People always ask me, what was your most fun moment as a CISO? And I think that every CISO out there can say that the most fun moment you can have is to get all of your operation units into one room. You can say, I have this much budget, I have this much effort when it comes to incident response. Tell me the 5 systems I'm going to keep up and running when everything hits the fan. And then you kick your feet back, grab the popcorn, and watch them fight it out. That is the most fun that you can have, but that's a conversation you have to have. You don't get to decide as CISO what the most important things are. You need to get told, but somebody has to tell you. And most of the time, it's not the squeaky wheel gets the grease sort of situation. And a lot of times, they don't even understand what the interdependencies on those systems are. So many people have said, oh, I need you to keep email up and running. Well, in order for me to keep email up and running, I got to keep these 5 other systems up and running too. Doesn't do me any good to keep email up if routing's not up. And if routing's not up, and I need DNS to be up in order for that. So yeah, now those are your 5 systems right there. For me to keep email up, that's the 5 systems you get. And they're like, wow, maybe that's not the best use of our resources. No, probably not. What do you want up? If I can only keep 5 things up, what 5 things do you get? And who's going to make that decision? And then let's put that in paper. And one of the things is that might change. It might say, well, during this time of the year, during tax season, these are the 5 most important systems. During the time where we're running these operations, these are the 5 most important systems. So you got to have these moving targets. Now you have to look at incident response saying, okay, does my incident response change based on what my priorities are for that particular month, for that particular scenario, for that particular project plan that's going on? Where are my vulnerabilities? And so those are why you need to exercise as often as possible, is to say, are we shifting our responsibilities, our priorities, based on the current threat environment?
Luckily, the data center going down was one of these. Not my problem, because my system was only important to my people. I let my contracting program manager know that when he got in the morning, he was going to be unhappy because everything crashed essentially. And then I let my boss, the program manager, know that he needed to call our SES and let her know before anybody else did that the data center going down, not our problem, and we could only do what we could once the data center had power and up and operational again. And the reason the data center went down, just for everybody to know, is because the infrastructure, the physical building infrastructure was so old, we had an obsolete motherboard that allowed you to transfer from commercial to generator power. And they were in the process of replacing that board. When the board said, I quit, and the company that created that board had been out of business for about 20, 30 years. So don't know how they fixed it, don't care, not my problem, but it was just like.
So I responded to an incident once, and we were working with this company, and we got in there, and they were like, hey, we're on backup generator right now. And we're like, okay, so that's good to know. You're on backup generator. How long will the backup generator last? And they're like, the backup generator is rated to, sorry about that. The backup generator is rated to be able to give us 24 hours, for the data center. So we should be good. You have 24 hours to try and get all of this fixed. And we're like, okay. Within an hour of us working, suddenly systems started failing and the generator was starting to sputter. And we're like, hey, you told us 24 hours. And then the engineer come in and the engineer was like, what do you mean 24 hours? And we're like, we were told that your generator would last for 24 hours. He's like, yeah, 5 years ago when we put the generator in, but they've added 10 times more hardware in there. And we keep telling them they're out scoping their generator that we get an hour at max. If everything stays on, if they didn't start shutting servers down, when we built the generator, when we built this data center, there was only room for 10 racks. And now we've put 100 racks in here, so those are the kind of things that you don't want to find out when you're doing incident response. Is that when I was at HHS too, another quick story is we were getting ready to do a failover, and we decided to do a test during the failover, but I was looking at the project plan, and I was looking at the incident response plan. I said, you know what, I'm not comfortable with all this stuff going on. I was like, I would like some more safety controls in here. I said, let's go a little deeper. Let's add a couple more redundancies or a couple more safety nets in this thing. And they're like, Clint, we've already got 4 layers of safety built into this. And I said, I would like 6. And they're like, no, we're only going to do 4. So after a lot of haggling and stuff like that, they did 6. And I was happy with that. And I finally signed off for the plan to go on. So all that happened on the weekend. And my first phone call I got saying, hey, safety net number 1 has failed. Hey, Clint, just to let you know, safety net 2 has failed. We're not freaking out because we still have 4 more layers. About an hour later, say safety net 3 just went down. We're starting to sweat a little bit here. Safety net 4 went down, then 5, then 6, and then 7. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. It was a cascading parade of failure. And when we had to go and testify in front of Congress exactly what happened, we actually had the documentation that said, look, we planned for 7 layers of eventuality. It went, past what we had, but, even Congress looked at us and said, you know what, nobody could have planned any more than what you did, but sometimes these things happen. And that's what people need to realize during incident response is no matter how much you plan, something's going to happen that you just couldn't account for, or it's going to go one layer deep than, for any Futurama fans out there, when they're driving the oil tanker spaceship and they said, why didn't, it went through all 10,000 layers, why didn't we have 10,001? There's always going to be that one. No matter how many layers of stuff you have, there's always going to be that one thing that makes it go worse. So, and you need to look at it from, the standpoint of financial, you need to look at it from people. So, run it where you have no budget left, saying, hey, we have an incident and we actually have no excess capital to be able to attack this budget. Run it where all the important people, the people who make decisions, are on vacation. And run the exercise with those people not physically allowed in the room. Don't let them be able to contribute to the answer. Say, hey, Bob's on vacation. What would you do if our lead engineer is not here? Run it where you don't have certain access to certain systems, or you don't have certain data, or certain partners aren't available, or maybe the partners are the problem. One of the best exercises I was ever a part of was a Secret Service exercise, and the whole exercise starts with the Secret Service walking in, slamming down some books on a table, looking at the people who wanted to hold the tabletop, and they said, hey, we've just investigated company X, Y, and Z, and we found all of your critical or all your private data on their servers. How did it get there? No indicators of compromise. You have nothing. Did you have somebody on your own company? Was it an insider threat who stole the information and gave it to your competitor? Did you have a data breach that, so how would you figure out how your data got on somebody else's server when you have no indicators of compromise, when you have nothing going wrong with your systems? Or what if you're the bad guy? What if it was the State Department that actually was doing the denial of service? So you were being blocked by Okta because you were performing a denial of service because somebody had compromised your system. What if you are the bad guys in the scenario? What if you're the one who's sending out emails that are laced with malware on them because somebody's compromised you? These are the exercises you need to run. You need to think like a bad guy. Think like what makes people uncomfortable. You don't want the scenario to run smoothly because there's always something worse that can happen, and you want to test against that.
Communication is key. In the middle of a scheduled incident response or system failover test. In the federal government, you're not only required to have the plan, you're also forced to test it once a year. Okay, we had Okta, our ATO was broken up in 2 areas, basically the cloud stuff and then the on-prem stuff. Okta was in the cloud, so we left that being. It's like, okay, let's fail over the on-prem stuff. We all had it scheduled out. We figured it's going to take about 3 hours, and we started doing it, and the exercise going fine. But when we were trying to fail over to our DR site, We couldn't do it. We're trying to figure out, we're troubleshooting. The people who own the network firewalls had changed the IP addresses of the firewall blocking our, or segmenting our environment. And oh yeah, no one ever told us. So we had to go through an emergency CR, and changing a firewall rule set is not easy. It's complicated for a reason, because you have to get authority and approvals. So that way you make sure. It took them 3 hours to rush through an emergency firewall rule change, because no one had ever told us that they changed our destination for the firewall that marked our DMZ. So we were bouncing off firewalls left and right, troubleshooting, because, oh, no one told you? It's my own freaking system. When the hell were you gonna tell me? We have a whole CCB, change control board process, for the entire State Department. And no one bothered to say, who's using that widget as a firewall? Let's talk to them and say, hey, we took it upon ourselves to change this for you. That's the other thing about incident response plan. Like Clint said earlier, know who your team members are. Just because you're a company or a city or a state, know who your county, state, and even federal points of contact are in case you are a subject of an attack or ransomware. They will talk to you. They will help you. They are a key source, and you need to have an established relationship with them. You know, Clint may be the god of CISA here for everybody here, but I hate to break to you, he's not the only one there. This guy, don't know, CISA shirt. $10 says he would know how to get a hold of Clint if the crap was hitting the fan, and be able to get help, or be able to tell you, talk to the GBI or the FBI local office, call this number, it's a 24-hour support number. Or you gotta call John Doe because, you know, his partner Jane is over on vacation. Talk to people, know them.
Communication is key. Imagine you're in charge of a data center, and you walk in and you're brand new, and you find out, okay, these are the people and these are the companies that I have working here in my data center. And you come to work in another couple of weeks, and there's new faces on the floor. And you're going, wait a minute, where did these people come from? They've changed the contract on me. And I've got new people, new contract. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what the systems are. They don't know what the backups are. They don't know what the procedures are. Prime time for an attack. So luckily, we thwarted it. But, you know, there's always the communication piece where you've got to ask, who else do I need to talk to? Who else needs to know? Who else do I need to involve in my planning when things, you know, are calm, right?
The day of an incident, you don't want to find out
don't
Catherine
wanna find
retired
it.
3 months ago,
Right.
and you don't know who her replacement is.
Prepare in peace for time of war. And that includes your information technology systems.
Be open and honest with yourself. When the city of Atlanta got hit with ransomware, I had gone in to help them. And that was a grueling week. You know, I was sleeping on their conference room floor because I never went home through a good deal of that. But afterwards, the CISO for Atlanta and I were sitting there talking. And he looked at me and he said, Clint, he's like, before this incident happened, he said, I looked at my team and I thought that I had one of the best IT teams that I could possibly have. And he's like, and now after all this happened, he's like, I realized that I was looking at them through rose-colored glasses. They are fantastic. They are a great IT team for steady state operations. They are used to operating in a steady environment. The skill set needed for incident response is a completely different skill set. Doing forensics, being able to configure a firewall on the fly, being able to do routing and stuff like that, being able to do the things, that's a completely different avenue of skills that you need. He's like, my people are good steady state operators, but they are not good incident responders. He's like, and I didn't ever think about having an incident response contract or having cyber insurance or having, any surge support that I could call on, because I didn't realize that this skill set even existed until I saw that what was needed in action. And that's where you have to really be, honest with yourself as you're running these exercises. If somebody says, oh, I would just reconfigure that firewall in order to do X or to block this chime of traffic, or I would be able to I think within an hour I could get you an answer. I'm like, you're looking like, okay, you're going to go through 1 million log files in your SIM solution, and you're going to find me patient 0, and you think you can do that in an hour. I was like, prove it. Let's actually prove that, because timelines matter in incident response. And if you're painting a picture that's not realistic, or if you think you have a skill set, the number of times organizations have said, oh, we would just restore from backup. And I'm like, okay, and we can get that done in an hour. And I say, prove it. And they start to prove it and realize, well, we can't really, it takes a whole lot longer to restore that than we thought, or we can restore it, but it's not validated. One time we went into an organization and I was looking over their incident response plan. I said, you know what? You have a conflict here. And they're like, what do you mean we have a conflict? I was like, well, in your incident response plan, it says that you have 24 hours in order to resolve this event. I'm like, but I'm looking at your support contract with Dell, and all of your hardware comes from Dell, and they have 48 to 72 hours in order to get you hardware resupply. How are you doing a 24-hour refresh on something if they're not getting you parts for 48 hours?
Well, because when the parts arrive, they're already be pre-built, pre-configured, and pre-hardened. So all you got to do is plug it in and play, right?
Exactly. And that's people don't look at these things. They put numbers down because they think they look good or they're trying to impress somebody. That's not the incident response plan you want. You want to actually say, okay, let's tabletop it this year, but next year, let's put our money where our mouth is. Let's exercise it. Let's actually do a live fire or a warm fire exercise. Or let's just take a subset of this and say, how long would it take? I'm going to put a needle in a haystack in this log file. I want you to actually find it, Test your people. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that the skill set is different from steady state ops. I know that in universities they've got competitive cyber teams that are doing their thing. They're thank you very much. I'd like to sing a song. No.
I'd like to hear that song.
Feelings.
I need more alcohol.
So my question as a layperson is: are the types of things that competitive cyber teams do at least a part of that unique skill set that you would use in a crisis response? Or is that a place to, or a template to follow for organizations to build that skill set? Or
it can be. It depends on how you define that, because there are that's why you exercise, is to find out what do you have on staff, what are you lacking. Do you have analysts who can do analysis that fast? Do you have a forensics expert? Have you ever hunt? Does anybody know what a hunt even looks like? How would you hunt for something? Have you ever tried to find patient 0? Because I can tell you right now that if you're doing incident response and you're not looking for patient 0, you're just going to get hit. As soon as you get cleaned up, you're going to get hit again. If you didn't find out how they really got in there, then you're just kind of, biding your time to get hit again. So when you start to sit down and start to map out, and using the NICE framework or whatever framework that you looked at, there's an incident response category, and the incident response lists skill sets such as forensics response. It's going to list, what the engineering response, all these things are. It's all these different skill sets. Find out what you have on staff, and then test them to say, would you be good in incident crisis?
Can they work under stress, or are they going to, fold like a paper towel?
Are they using Google to do most of their job, or are they able to do it off the top of their head?
It's like survival training for the military, and Navy SEALs, A pilot can fly, but what happens if he's got to leave his bird and is stuck behind enemy territory? Is he going to, need a skivvy change in 2 minutes, or is he going to find his way out, with only a skivvies and be like, God damn, I won?
I understand what the problem is in terms of building the skill set. How do organizations build that skill set. And
So some of them don't build it. Some of them get cyber insurance and say that
or how should they?
we're going to have somebody come in and assess what we don't have. And that's where CISA comes in a lot of times too. I get called in to do a lot of incident response. I can't put hands on keyboard when I represent CISA doing incident response. I do what I call incident coordination. I come in and I start to look at what everybody's doing and I start to say, look, it doesn't look like these people are capable of doing the things you need. The surge support you need. I work with their insurance company a lot of times saying, I think they're lacking X, Y, and Z. I can tell you there was one incident that I was doing somewhat recently in which they were like, oh, we have a forensics person on staff. And I went to talk to the forensic person and was like, okay, what are you doing for chain of custody in case you decide to prosecute this? And they looked at me and they said, what's chain of custody? And I turned around and looked at them and said, this is not the right forensics person. He is able to recover information. He's able to do forensic investigation to recover information, but he is not doing it in a sound or repeatable manner that would hold up in a court of law. So if you're looking to prosecute based on this information, you're kind of SOL at this point in time. I was like, unless you bring somebody in here who can understand chain of custody and start doing that. But if you didn't have those procedures outlined, if you didn't exercise to figure out that that's something that you needed, then it's too late by the time you realize it. So looking at your environment, and every environment is different. Do you need an OT person? It's great that you have an IT person that can configure on the fly, but can he configure OT, routing on the fly too? Because now you have IT OT convergence. What you're looking for is your IT, or is your badge access system, your camera system, and your IT system? Is that how you're going to do patient zero investigation to find out whether this is insider threat versus an external threat? Versus is somebody been compromised? What other things might be going on because of this? That's why you exercise. The first time you exercise, you're going to find so many holes, so many gaps, but you don't give up. You start to say, okay, what is our risk tolerance? Because that's the other thing I talked about with the CISO from Atlanta. He says, I can't afford to have all the expertise I need for incident response on staff all of the time. What is my avenue? And I said, your only avenue then is to find either another county, and this is what I tell a lot of counties. It's like, maybe you have a forensic specialist, and then you have an agreement with the county next door for them to get an engineering specialist, and you have a county-to-county agreement that says, hey, I can borrow your engineer for a time of crisis, but I'll give you my forensics guy during a time of crisis.
An MOU, by talking to other people, say it isn't possible.
And that's why you do these ecosystem exercises. Who's bringing what to the table? When can you call the National Guard in to help you? When can you call local law enforcement? Who can fill the gaps that you're not able to keep on staff full time? But you have to do that by being open and honest and actually exercising and testing to the limit on what you're capable of. And then you have to realize, and that has to be documented in your plan, because what if Bob leaves and you replace Bob with Fred? Did Fred have the same capabilities that Bob had? Okay, Bob was rated at incident response. He was able to recover, reconfigure firewalls on the fly, but can Fred, his replacement, do that? Are you one person deep? Are you two people deep? Where are your single points of failure? Where do you lose trust in the system to being able to recover? Or more importantly, be able to sustain your business while you're going through a time of crisis. So business continuity. Did that answer your question even just a little bit? I hope so.
It got the big chunks of the question answered, but I think the rest of the answer probably.
I think the rest of it, I'd have to work with you. Call me. We work one-on-one where I can sit down with you and say because every environment is so unique. I'd hate to give you wrong information. Right. There's so depending on what you need for incident response would be to say this is how I think you should supplement.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
You got me with the way. Thanks.
So I think you hit on something that was kind of important when you talk about that, being honest, because I think some of us have probably been through exercises where we don't want to fail. We don't want to look bad in front of the boss. So, okay, I'll take it down a volume or an octave there. So we don't want to look bad in the exercise, but we forget what the purpose of exercise is, right? It's doing sets and reps. It's going to hurt. You're going to get stronger from it. But you have to admit what your gaps are, stop covering up the gaps, expose them to the boss so the boss can take action to make sure that, as Green said, we're man-trained and equipped to actually be able to address those incidences when they arise. Thank you.
You don't want a PSC
Absolutely.
doing something a sergeant major should be doing.
But if you can, go ahead. But that's exactly it. I think, historically speaking, the exercises, we want to succeed. And there is a bit of a fear of failure, especially in front of your higher ups. And, pointing out that, we didn't think of everything. And
But as the gentleman
there
said,
are
that's what an
gaps.
exercise is.
gaps and holes. And, how do we fill that?
To quote Batman, why do we fall down? So that we can pick ourselves back up. That's the whole purpose. Is if you're the only thing you're failing to do in an exercise is if you set the bar so low that you're going to succeed without effort. And you're not worried about whether you succeed. I never worry about what the end of an exercise looks like. We never talk about, I talk about how they recovered to steady state operations, but I never talk about whether they did it right or anything like that. There's no such thing as right and wrong when it comes to that. Okay, there is a way to do wrong, but there's so many different ways to do right too. And sometimes it's just luck. I can tell you that most incident response plans I see, after I read through them one time, I can look at them and be like, you're expecting your people to be superheroes. You're expecting them to wear capes because you are expecting them to go above and beyond. And a lot of times it's the people, people didn't account for something. I'll tell you this quick story too. So when I was working for an organization, we had a coop site. So we had a hot site that was ready to go, but we didn't have, I guess you could call it a warm site, because we needed 12 people to go and stand up our warm site to turn it from warm to hot. And should something happen in our geographic location, those 12 people would be on a plane and would be over to do that, hot site. So we had a tornado hit our town, to this organization. And so I showed up at the airport, 4 o'clock in the morning, ready to jump on that plane, ready to go start the hot site. 3 other people showed up. We had 20 people scheduled to be on that plane. 4 people were standing on that platform. When we started making phone calls saying we can't start the hot site up without more people, they started saying, how can you expect us to leave our families during a time of crisis? We're going to stay home with our family. We're going to make sure that our people are okay. We're not going to leave our community in this. We had tabletop exercised this thing ad nauseum, and then the real thing event, and suddenly people were like, emotions and the reality of things hit, and they're like, I'm not willing to leave my family. I'm not willing to do X. If you ever watch war games, how does war games start? It starts with 2 people needing to turn the key, and one of them has second thoughts on it. There's so many incident response things I can tell you where it takes 2 people to do something, and suddenly one of them's not willing to do the job that you told them, that they sat at a table and told you all day and every day that they could do it in 1 hour, they could do it this way, but then when push came to shove, they didn't want to do it. Maybe it wasn't moral, maybe it wasn't ethical, maybe whatever it was that they were putting on, suddenly they had second thoughts about what they were doing.
You brought up something that I think is very important too. Back in my career, we fell back to a coop site to exercise the coop site. And the coop site went down while we were in the middle of the exercise. So, you've got
You forgot to pay the electric bill, damn it.
You've got to exercise your exercises sometimes.
Remember, this is not about who wins or whatever. And I hate to use this analogy again, but being a grandmother of 3, you're teaching the toddlers what they need to learn and excel in the world. If my 5-year-old grandson never got up to walk, would he ever have walked? And if yelling at him every time he fell caused him not to walk, was that helpful or hurtful? The only thing I ever did is giggle at him and go, uh-oh, get up and try again. And guess what he did? Now, of course, you can't pin him down for anything, but think of it from this way. This is a learning exercise. My oldest grandson once said is, when I told him computers are dumb, he's like kids. No, they're not. Kids haven't been taught what is possible or what you can do. Computers need to be told, breathe in, pause, breathe out. And kids do it naturally. So you have to be very explicit and particular when you set instructions and things like that. I have always, as a program manager, tested my COOP and my build sheets and all that stuff. But you know what? Give it to the new guy on the team. I don't care if he had 14 years experience somewhere else. Here's our build sheets. Build the server, build the firewall, build this. Well, it's missing this. Then fix it. It only gets improved by use and reuse and improvement.
And testing.
And make sure you're inviting your legal department to do any of these exercises with you, because I can tell you if you exercise without legal, when you go to do it in the real world, suddenly legal is going to step in and say, yeah, you can't do it that way. That's a violation of X, Y, or Z, or that's not within our parameters to do. So you've got to invite legal to be part of this, and legal will push back and be like, yeah, I don't really need to be there. And it's like, yeah, until it really happens. And then suddenly you're telling me, no, even though you exercise it that way, and that's what's written in the playbook, I can't let you do it that way because that would be putting us in a position of compromise from a legal standpoint. So make sure legal is involved. And I can't stress that enough because the number of times, like I was the first person that Colonial Pipeline called when they got hit. And I was working with them and we were doing great things together until legal got involved. Legal said, what's he doing here? And they said, well, we always work these things through with CISA. And he's like, nope, CISA's out of here. And they kicked us out of the room. And that's when things, and that's when things started to fall apart. We stopped communicating. We didn't know what was going on. And they were like, well, we could really use CISA's expertise. And legal was like, nope, we don't want CISA in here with us. So, just make sure that you invite all the right players when you do this.
Yeah. We can't build a firm critical infrastructure if we aren't exercising and finding the weaknesses so we can prepare.
Critical infrastructure includes SCADA and OT guys.
Right.
It's all become a big blur. Do not forget IT's, redheaded stepchild, evil twins, evil cousins, whatever. It's all one family melting pot. And don't assume that the IT and the OT and SCADA people know what IT knows.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, one of the first things that Clint taught us in Atlanta, at the Atlanta first exercise you ran with us, was how do you even recognize that you're going to have a problem? And where do you recognize it and where do you start calling in people? And that's something to consider when you're doing these exercises also. Because he started with the World Cup coming to Atlanta, and it went on from there, and little things that we should have picked up on just took a while to pick up on. It was very interesting exercise. So Kathy, Clint, Marina, thank you all very, very much. Really appreciate it.
I will tell you that when I was with the intelligence community, we were going through an incident one time, and I remember that there was a general who was getting very upset because he's like, pulled my boss, the installation commander, to the side and said, I don't like that IT guy that you have that's running around cracking jokes everywhere. And the installation commander looked at him and said, sir, when Clint stops cracking joke, that's when I start to get worried. He's in complete control as long as he's cracking jokes. That means he's in response. So that always kind of stuck with me.
We got to laugh or we'll go insane.